Okay, I want you to close your eyes for a second. That is, unless you're driving, of course.
Of course.
And I want you to picture a scene. It's winter.
Okay.
It is specifically noon on Tuesday, January 20, 1942.
So, Berlin, mid-war.
Exactly. And you were standing in this manicured garden, looking at a luxurious villa. The address is Amgrossen Wannsee, 5658. It's a wealthy, quiet suburb.
Beautiful spot. It overlooks the Wannsee Lake.
It's picturesque, serene. You know, the kind of place you'd expect a wedding reception, maybe a high-end corporate retreat.
It paints a very specific, very civilized picture, doesn't it? It's peaceful.
Totally.
But we know that inside that dining room with its big windows and that lovely view of the lake, something absolutely catastrophic is being planned.
Right. This building, it was once owned by a pharmaceutical manufacturer, then some right-wing industrialist. Now it's an SS guest house.
And on this particular Tuesday, it was hosting a meeting, a business meeting, really, scheduled to be followed by lunch.
A business meeting. But the agenda wasn't, quarterly earnings or a new product launch.
No.
15 high-ranking men, the absolute elite of the German state and the Nazi Party, were gathering for 90 minutes. And in those 90 minutes, they were there to coordinate the logistical details of the final solution of the Jewish question.
Exactly. And that is really the mission of our deep dive today. We're not trying to cover the entire Holocaust in broad strokes. That's just too massive for a single sitting.
Impossible.
We are zooming in with a microscope on this specific document, the Wannsee Protocol, the minutes of this meeting.
And we really want to explore that chilling contrast you just mentioned, the civilized, bureaucratic, almost mundane nature of this gathering versus the horrific reality of what they were actually planning.
The genocide. It's the ultimate example of what the philosopher Hannah Arendt famously called the banality of evil.
I've always found that phrase so haunting, but reading through the source material for this, it becomes so literal. These weren't frothing madmen screaming in a dungeon.
Not at all. They were educated men in a sunlit room, getting ready to have some cognac after their work was done.
And before we unpack who was even there, I think we have to make a really crucial historical distinction. Because this is where a lot of people, even history buffs, get the timeline wrong.
That's a huge point. There's this common assumption that the Wannsee Conference was the green light.
The moment of decision.
A moment the Nazis decided to murder the Jews, yes. But that's just not true.
It's the standard movie version, right? Hitler sends an order, they meet at the villa, stamp a paper, and then the killing starts.
Right. But the sources tell a very different and in some ways an even darker story. Mass murder was already well underway.
By January 42.
For months. If we look at the timeline, the Einsatzgruppe
And mobile killing squads.
Those mobile killing squads, they had been shooting Jewish civilians in the Soviet Union since June 1941. That's 6 months before this meeting.
6 months, so thousands upon thousands of people were already dead.
Tens of thousands. Hundreds of thousands. And we have evidence that gassing experiments using Zyklon B had already begun at Auschwitz in late 41. The Chelmno death camp, which used gas fans, was already operating in occupied Poland. The machine was running.
So let me play devil's advocate for a second. If the killing has already started, if these Einsatzgruppen are already shooting people by the thousands in ditches in Russia, why call this meeting?
That is the pivotal question.
Why get all these high-ranking state secretaries and SS leaders together in a room in Berlin? What was the point if the decision was effectively already made?
The answer is management. It was about streamlining, coordinating, and essentially codifying the administration of the genocide.
Codifying it, making it official policy.
You have to understand the German state at this time. It wasn't this perfectly sleek monolith where everyone knew what everyone else was doing.
It was a mess of competing bureaucracies.
A total tangle. You had the civilian ministries, the party chancellery, the SS, the police, the railways. They were all constantly fighting over jurisdiction, over resources, over who was in charge of what.
So Reinhard Heydrich, the man who called the meeting, he's trying to herd cats.
Violent genocidal cats, yes. That's a good way to put it. Heydrich needed to ensure that all the different government ministries, transportation, justice, foreign affairs, were all marching in lockstep with the SS.
He wanted to make it clear who was driving the bus.
Exactly. He wanted to make it clear that he and the SS were in charge. He didn't want some lawyer from the Interior Ministry waking up 6 months later and saying, hey, hold on, you can't deport these people. It violates tax code section 4.
It's just terrifying to think of it that way. It was a meeting about jurisdiction. It was a corporate alignment meeting to ensure everyone was on the same page regarding the extermination of an entire people.
It was about making the entire state apparatus an accessory to the crime.
Yeah.
By the end of that 90-minute meeting, no one at that table could ever say, I didn't know, or that wasn't my department.
Everyone was implicated.
Everyone.
Okay, let's talk about the man running the show, Reinhard Heydrich. He's often called the architect of the Holocaust. But in the context of this meeting, who is he to these other men? Is he their boss?
Not exactly their direct boss, and that's part of the dynamic here.
Aye.
Heydrich was the chief of the Reich's Security Main Office, the RSHA. He was arguably the most dangerous man in the Third Reich after Hitler and Himmler.
Young, ambitious.
And utterly ruthless. Back in July of 1941, Hermann Goering, who was Hitler's number 2, had signed a directive. It authorized Heydrich to prepare a total solution to the Jewish question in the German sphere of influence.
So he had his mandate in writing. He had the golden ticket from the very top.
He did. But, having a piece of paper from Goering and having the actual practical cooperation from the Ministry of the Interior are two very different things.
Right. One is authority. The other is execution.
Precisely. So for this meeting, his goal was very specific. He wanted to assert his absolute authority, and by extension, the SS's authority, over this final solution. He wanted to prevent any bureaucratic delays. He wanted to look these state secretaries in the eye and say, I am in charge, you work for me on this, and you are going to help me.
So who were these people he was trying to boss around? I think when we picture Nazis, we often picture, thugs, brown shirts, street fighters breaking windows.
It's a stereotypical image.
Yeah. But looking at the guest list for Wannsee, that's not what we see at all.
No, and that's what makes that banality argument so potent. This was the intelligentsia. This was the elite.
I was looking at the notes. Of the 15 participants, 10 had university degrees.
And 8 of them held doctorates. PhDs or law degrees.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about lawyers, judges, high-level civil servants, the administrative backbone of the state.
It's startling. The demographics. Half of them were under the age of 40. These were young, upwardly mobile professionals. They were the yuppies of the Third Reich, essentially.
Exactly. They were the state secretaries. Now, in the German system, that title can be a bit confusing to Americans. A state secretary isn't a secretary who types letters.
No, it's the highest-ranking civil servant in a ministry, second only to the minister himself.
That's it. The minister is the politician. The state secretary is the guy who actually knows how the machinery works, the one who makes things happen.
So the minister gives the speech, but the state secretary writes the regulation that makes it law.
Precisely. And if you want to move millions of people across a continent during a brutal war, you don't need a thug with a club. You need a transport expert. If you want to strip people of their citizenship and their property so the state can seize it legally, you need a legal expert. You need bureaucrats. And that is who was at this table.
So let's put some faces to these titles. Who are some of the key players Heydrich invited to his villa?
Well, aside from Heydrich himself, you absolutely have to mention Adolf Eichmann.
A name most people will recognize.
For sure. At this meeting, he was actually one of the lower-ranking men in the room. He was the head of the RSHA's Jewish Affairs Department, Section 4B4. But he was the Jewish expert.
The subject matter expert.
He organized the meeting, he prepared the statistical data we're going to talk about later, and crucially, he took the notes. He wrote the protocol.
The man taking the minutes of the murder.
That was Eichmann. Then you had Dr. Wilhelm Stuckert from the Interior Ministry.
And he's a fascinating, horrifying figure.
He really is. He was a co-author of the Nuremberg Laws. He is the legal mind behind figuring out exactly who counts as a Jew and who doesn't. He represents the legal framework of the Reich.
So he's there to make sure everything is legal in their eyes.
In their twisted version of legality, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's Heinrich Müller, head of the Gestapo. He doesn't need much introduction. He represents the sheer police power, the guys who kick down the doors.
And we also have Martin Luther from the Foreign Office. Now, this one stuck out to me when I was preparing. Why does the Foreign Office need to be there? Isn't this an internal German matter?
That is a great observation, and it points directly to the incredible scope of their ambition. The Foreign Office had to be involved because Heydrich planned to deport Jews not just from Germany or Poland, but from allied and neutral countries, from France, from Slovakia, from Hungary, and eventually from places like England or Spain.
So if you're going to arrest people in a foreign country, even an occupied one, you need the diplomats to smooth the way.
You need them to handle the international pressure, to negotiate with puppet governments. You need that diplomatic cover.
And we can't forget Dr. Roland Freisler from the Justice Ministry.
A truly terrifying figure. He later became infamous as the screaming judge of the People's Court. There's film of him just shouting at defendants before sentencing them to death. A complete fanatic.
But here at Wannsee, he's representing the Justice Ministry.
And his presence essentially signaled that the courts would not stand in the way. Justice would be served Nazi style.
So we have the cast of characters. They're sitting in this beautiful villa by the lake. Let's turn to the evidence they left behind. The protocol itself. It's amazing we even have this document right. I mean, surely they would have wanted to burn every last copy.
It is a miracle of history that it survived. The protocol was marked Secret Reich Matter. Top secret. Only 30 copies were made and distributed. And at the end of the war, as the Reich was collapsing and the Allies were closing in, almost everyone destroyed their copy. They knew it was incriminating. They knew it was a death warrant if it was found.
But one survived.
Copy number 16. It belonged to Martin Luther, the Foreign Office guy we just mentioned.
How did his copy make it?
It's an ironic story. Luther fell out of favor later in the war. He actually plotted against his boss, Ribbentrop, and was sent to a concentration camp himself.
So he was purged.
He was, and because of that, his files were archived rather than being carefully curated or burned by his staff at the end. So, in 1947, a U.S. prosecutor named Robert Kempner was going through the Foreign Office files, and he just found it.
Unbelievable. A clerical error preserves the proof of the crime.
If Luther had been more careful, or if his staff had been more loyal, or if that one file had just been tossed in an incinerator, we might never know the specific details of what was said in that room.
That just gives me chills. Now, here's where it gets really interesting and deeply disturbing. If you read the document, and I know you have, it doesn't explicitly say, we are going to gas millions of people.
No.
It doesn't use the word murder. It doesn't use the word kill.
Not once. And that is by design.
It's written in this dense bureaucratic code. It reads like a zoning permit meeting.
Exactly. The Germans have a word for it. Ansprach. Office language. We know from Adolf Eichmann's later testimony in Israel that during the meeting itself, the men spoke quite plainly.
Oh, they did.
Eichmann admitted there was overplain talk. They discussed killing methods, gas, shooting, liquidation. It was all on the table. But when Eichmann sat down to write the minutes and Heydrich edited them, they translated that horror into these administrative euphemisms.
So it's a sanitized version for the official record.
A deliberately sanitized version.
Okay, let's decode some of these. Because when you see them on the page, they look almost innocent, but the meaning is deadly. For example, the phrase, evacuation to the east. What did that really mean?
Right. If you didn't know the context, evacuation to the east sounds like moving people to a new settlement, maybe a reservation or a work project.
A resettlement program.
In reality, it meant deportation to death camps, to Auschwitz, to Treblinka, to Sobibor.
And the final solution itself.
Systematic, continent-wide genocide. But the most chilling one, for me personally, is the phrase natural reduction.
Natural reduction. It sounds like something you'd read in a forestry report.
You need a natural reduction of the deer population.
Exactly. But they're talking about human beings.
It refers to working people to death. The plan explicitly states that able-bodied Jews would be sent to the east in large labor columns to build roads. The protocol says, quite coldly, that a large part of them will undoubtedly fall away through natural reduction.
Meaning starvation, exhaustion, disease.
Murder by labor.
And then there's the phrase, for those who don't die from the work. The ones who are strong enough to survive that ordeal. The protocol says they must be treated accordingly.
Treated accordingly. That is the code for execution. Murder.
And the logic behind that is just so twisted.
It's pure, twisted social Darwinism. The document argues that those who survive forced labor are, by definition, the most resilient, the strongest. Therefore, the Nazis viewed them as the most dangerous germ cell of a Jewish revival.
So because they are strong, they must be killed.
Exactly. If you let the strong ones live, the race will just grow back. So the strongest must be killed to prevent the race from ever regenerating. It's diabolical.
It's like cold-blooded. They are turning the very act of human survival into a death sentence.
And this is all part of what the protocol calls the combing through. It uses that phrase. Europe is to be combed through from west to east.
Like you're combing through data.
Or combing lice out of hair. It implies a systematic, rigorous, and demeaning search where no one is missed. It's a logistical operation. It treats human beings like data points to be processed, sorted, and ultimately deleted.
Speaking of data points, let's look at the sheer scope of this operation. Because Eichmann didn't just come with a notepad, he came with a list, the so-called Eichmann list.
Yes, this is on page 6 of the protocol. It's a statistical tabulation of the Jewish population in Europe. It breaks them down, country by country.
And the total number at the bottom of that page?
11 million.
11 million people. It's a staggering number to even comprehend. But what's even more revealing is when you look at where those 11 million people are.
Right. He divides them into 2 columns, Group A and Group B. Explain that distinction for us.
Well, Group A consisted of territories under direct German control at the time. Germany, Austria, occupied France, Poland, and so on. That's straightforward in terms of their reach.
They had the army there. They could grab those people tomorrow if they wanted.
Right. But Group B, that's where the global ambition becomes just undeniable.
Group B included countries that Germany didn't occupy, allies, neutral states, even enemies they were currently at war with.
I was looking at the list, and my jaw just dropped when I saw England.
Yes, England, 330,000 Jews listed, as if they were already a German province.
Ireland, 4,000.
Sweden, 8,000. Turkey, 55,500. Even neutral Switzerland, 18,000.
So what does this tell us? They aren't just talking about dealing with a Jewish problem inside their current war zone. This is something else entirely.
No, this document proves beyond any doubt that the final solution relied on a total German victory in the war.
It's a post-war plan.
They were actively planning for a post-war reality where they could reach into London, into neutral Stockholm, into Zurich, and extract the Jewish populations from there. They intended to hunt down every single Jew on the continent, regardless of borders, regardless of citizenship.
It just completely refutes any argument that this was some kind of wartime security measure or limited to the Eastern Front.
No, this was a continental cleansing program.
A program of absolute totality.
That was the vision Heydrich was selling to the men at that table. We are going to clean the entire continent, and you are going to help me do it.
So we have the people, the code language, the target list. Now let's get back into the room. What did they actually spend 90 minutes discussing? You'd think maybe someone would raise a hand and say, hold on, is this moral? Or is this legal? Or
My God, are we really going to kill 11 million people?
yes, anything.
Not a single person. In the entire 90 minutes, there is no record of anyone objecting to the principle of mass murder.
That silence is just deafening.
It is the single most important takeaway from the document, the total lack of dissent.
So if they weren't arguing about the morality of it, what were they arguing about?
Logistics and definitions. A significant portion of the meeting, maybe the most heated part, according to Eichmann, was spent debating the Mischling.
Mischling, that's the Nazi term for mixed-race individuals, right?
Yes, half Jews and quarter Jews. The Nazis were obsessed with racial purity, but they had created this self-inflicted bureaucratic problem.
What do you do as someone who has 2 Jewish grandparents but identifies as German? Maybe they served in World War I, maybe they're married to an Aryan woman and have kids.
And this is where Dr. Stuckert from the Interior Ministry really chimes in. The man who wrote the laws.
The legal expert.
Right. Stuckert, the lawyer, gets into a debate with the SS. He argues that deporting all of these half-Jews, these Mischling of the first degree, would cause too much administrative work.
Too much paperwork.
It would be a headache. It might cause unrest among the German relatives of these people. You know, if you deport a man who's a decorated war hero just because one of his parents is Jewish, his Aryan neighbors might get upset. It disrupts the social order.
So his objection wasn't humanitarian. It wasn't, this is cruel and monstrous. It was, this is too much paperwork and bad for PR.
Precisely. He proposed mandatory sterilization instead.
Instead of deportation.
He thought it was a more efficient solution. He essentially argued, look, let's just sterilize them all. The race dies out in a generation, but we keep them here so we don't have to deal with the logistical nightmare of moving them and all the social fallout.
Just think about that for a second. We are sitting around a table by a lovely lake, sipping cognac, and arguing whether it's more efficient to deport people to their deaths or to forcibly sterilize them.
And they're treating it like a zoning dispute. Should we rezone this block commercial or residential?
This is the banality we were talking about. It's beyond chilling. They were arguing over legal definitions and whose ministry gets to control the process. Stuckert didn't want the SS taking over all his administrative duties regarding mixed-race citizens.
It was a power struggle, a turf war disguised as a policy debate.
Was there also an economic dimension to the discussion? I remember seeing the name Eric Neumann in the protocol.
Yes, Eric Neumann from the Office of the Four-Year Plan. That was the ministry responsible for the war economy.
And he had a practical concern.
A very practical one. He pointed out that there were Jews working in industries that were absolutely essential to the war effort. Metalworking, munitions, specialized skilled labor. He argued that they shouldn't be killed immediately.
The key word there being immediately.
Right. He wasn't saying don't kill them. He was saying don't kill them yet. We need them to make bullets for a few more months.
And what was Heydrich's response to that?
Heydrich, being a pragmatist, agreed. He clarified that Jews essential to war production would not be evacuated, again, there's that code word, until suitable non-Jewish replacements could be found. But he made it absolutely clear this was a temporary deferment. The ultimate goal remained total elimination for everyone.
So the outcome of the meeting seems to be exactly what Heydrich wanted from the start. Did he get any real pushback on the main goal?
None whatsoever. It was a total success for him. He walked in there wanting to assert the SS's dominance and get the entire civil service on board, and he left with their enthusiastic cooperation.
The Foreign Office, the Justice Ministry, the Interior Ministry.
They were all now complicit. They'd agreed to do their part, to use their resources to make the gears of genocide turn as smoothly as possible.
The state apparatus was now unified behind this one goal.
Yes. The final solution was no longer just an SS project. It was a state project. The guy running the trains, the guy issuing the passports, the guy interpreting the laws, they were all on the same team now, working towards the same end.
So the meeting wraps up. It's been about an hour and a half. What happens next? Do they all just go home and reflect on the horror of what they've just agreed to?
Well, according to the records, and especially Eichmann's later testimony, the tension in the room broke. The business was concluded. They had a social hour.
A social hour?
The participants stood around, they drank cognac, they smoked, and they had lunch served to them.
That image is it's impossible to shake. They sign off on the industrial-scale murder of 11 million people, and then they have a drink and some sandwiches.
It speaks to the complete compartmentalization of their minds. To them, they had just solved a complex administrative problem. It was a job well done.
Eichmann said he felt satisfied, didn't he?
He did. He later said he felt a sense of satisfaction, of relief. He'd expected resistance from the bigwigs, from these powerful state secretaries. He thought they might throw up legal roadblocks or bureaucratic hurdles. Instead, he saw them eager to please, eager to be part of the solution.
He was happy that his boss, Heydrich, was happy.
Essentially, he saw consensus. He saw these high-ranking, educated men with doctorates all nodding along, agreeing that this was the right and necessary path. For a functionary like Eichmann, that was the ultimate validation.
Let's look at the fate of these 15 men. They planned this monstrous future, but many of them didn't live to see it through, or at least not for long.
No, many didn't. Reinhard Heydrich, the architect himself, didn't even survive the year.
Right, he was assassinated in Prague.
By Czech partisans trained by the British.
Oh.
Operation Anthropoid. In June 1942, just a few months after the conference, his car was bombed. He didn't die instantly, but from sepsis a week later.
And the Nazis unleashed horrific reprisals for his death.
Unspeakable reprisals, wiping out the entire villages of Lidice and Ležáky. But Heydrich himself was gone.
And Eichmann, the note-taker.
Eichmann escaped to Argentina after the war. He lived there for years under a false name, Ricardo Clement.
Until he was found.
He was captured by the Israeli Mossad in a really daring operation in 1960. They smuggled him out of Argentina, brought him to Israel, and put him on trial in Jerusalem.
And that trial is pivotal.
It's where the world really learned the details of Wannsee. Eichmann's testimony is how we know about the plain talk versus the code words. He was, of course, found guilty and was executed in 1962.
What about the others? The civilized lawyers, the state secretaries with their PhDs?
It's a mixed bag and, frankly, a very frustrating one. Some died in the war. Roland Freisler, the screaming judge, was killed in an Allied bombing raid on his courthouse in Berlin in 1945.
Poetic justice of a sort.
Some committed suicide when Germany fell, but others got off relatively lightly, shockingly so.
Like Dr. Stuckert, the sterilization expert.
Dr. Stuckert, the man who argued for sterilization over deportation because it was less paperwork. He served only a few years in prison. He was released and died a free man in a car accident in 1953.
That's infuriating. It feels like justice was only partially served, if that.
It is. Many of these desk murderers faded back into obscurity. They claimed they were just following orders, or that they didn't know the full extent of the killing, despite the fact that their signatures and their presence are all over the documents.
So let's bring it all together. What does this all mean for us today? Why do we need to keep looking at this specific 90-minute meeting? Why zoom in on this one document?
I think it brings us right back to Hannah Arendt and that concept we started with, the banality of evil.
Right.
This deep dive forces us to confront the fact that great evil isn't always committed by monsters with horns and tails. It isn't always committed by frothing sadists who take pleasure in pain.
It's committed by functionaries, by bureaucrats.
Exactly. By people who are just following orders or just doing their job or just interpreting the law. These men at Wannsee were not foaming at the mouth. They were problem solvers. They viewed the existence of the Jewish people as a logistical hurdle that needed to be overcome with efficiency, with budget management, and with interdepartmental cooperation.
These were men who went home to their families, who listened to classical music, who read books, petted their dogs, and yet they could sit in a sunlit villa and plan the eradication of an entire people without, it seems, blinking an eye.
The Wannsee Protocol is permanent, undeniable evidence that the Holocaust wasn't an accident. It wasn't just a chaotic outburst of violence that got out of hand.
It's a plan.
It was planned, calculated, and administered with the same tools used to run a post office or a tax bureau. And that's what's so terrifying. It indicts the entire system. It shows that in a totalitarian state, the civilized institutions, the courts, the diplomats, the civil service, can become the most effective and deadly tools of terror.
It's such a heavy takeaway. It reminds us that we have to be vigilant not just against overt hatred, but against indifference, against the idea that morality can somehow be suspended for the sake of administrative efficiency.
Absolutely. The road to Wannsee wasn't paved with sudden madness. It was paved with thousands of small bureaucratic concessions that chipped away at the humanity of the victims until they were just numbers on a list.
We always ask, how could this happen? And the answer is usually complex and multifaceted. But sometimes the answer is disturbingly simple. It happened because 15 men in suits sat down, had a meeting, agreed on a plan, and then went to lunch.
And nobody in that room flipped the table.
And nobody flipped the table. A truly sobering thought to end on. We'll leave you with that. This has been a deep dive into the Wannsee Conference. Thank you for listening.